Hey everyone, Josh is Severe Weather, and welcome to my channel. We're going to talk about the tropics and three areas to watch in the Atlantic Basin, some in the Pacific as well. And I hope you all had a great Labor Day weekend. Finally, a bit of a taste of fall here in the eastern United States and the Midwest. We got more of that coming next week as well. I know that's exciting. College football's back, NFL starts, all the kids are back in school. So we've got changes coming, but the tropics have not really come to life the way that many predicted earlier in the season. However, we're not even halfway to the midpoint of the season yet. That is hitting next week. So we are definitely not finished with our potential threats. I'm going to talk a lot about what's to come here across the Atlantic Basin and an area that I continue to be concerned with potentially in the Gulf of Mexico next week. And we've got a lot of potential for this to change still. And I'd love to say I know exactly what's going to happen, but as a meteorologist, all I can really do is just kind of talk about what we're noticing, what we know now, what may happen, and what is unlikely to happen. So we do have a feature right now moving through the Eastern Caribbean, not likely to develop for the next couple of days. It will have a window in the Northwest Caribbean to potentially become our next named system. But even that window is not super big. It may even take until it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. If it does so, before we see our next system forming, that could be a threat to land. This system does have the potential, if it stays over the warm waters of the Western Gulf, to eventually become a hurricane, but the timeline continues to get pushed back further and further into time. I'm going to talk about what the steering currents may look like and what may happen with this and why it could still be something that we need to watch for in Texas and the Central Gulf Coast region. And we're going to talk about other features on the map as well here as well. Here's a look at the Atlantic. Three areas that we're monitoring. This is the first one, has a 40% chance to develop. Another one, which has come back to life. It was taken off the map, put back on this morning. Again, probably not a big threat to land at this time. And then a third feature to keep an eye on. The Eastern Pacific has quieted down after a very busy burst over the last couple of weeks. The Western Pacific remains busy with an invest southeast of Japan and a stronger tropical storm Yagi, which will be taking aim at southern China here as a typhoon later on this week. Here's a look from Tomerberg's website of the Atlantic Basin. Water temperatures remain well above average across most of the tropical Atlantic. And here are the three areas to watch. Now, area number one, not likely to develop for a couple more days, and then a 40 to 60% chance that it becomes something here. 40 for now, that it may form, 60% that it doesn't in the Northwest Caribbean and eventually into the Southwestern Gulf, where the reason why things are going to take a little bit longer is that wind shear right now is still pretty strong, keeping the system from forming, but wind shear will start to relax as the system moves towards the Yucatan and Belize here towards the weekend. Two other areas we're watching. One, we'll keep an eye on here across the Leeward Islands, Virgin Islands, and maybe Puerto Rico. I don't think it's going to have a direct impact, but we'll have to keep an eye on it if it does try to form. And then the next wave out in the open Atlantic affecting the Cabo Verdes, used to be the Cape Verdes, and that is unlikely to become a landfalling system at this point. Here's a look at the Atlantic Basin. You can see most of the region remains well above average, with the highest anomalies across the far northern Atlantic, including the Azores. What we have noticed is some cooling from the Canary Current and some cooling as well near and south of the equator here. Both of these have kind of killed off the chances to seeing anything develop in the far eastern Atlantic and even the central Atlantic. And it takes until storms get into this region to see them forming. And that will probably continue to be the case here over the coming weeks. You can see down on the map here in the Pacific, La Nina taking shape as well. And that is likely to continue to intensify here as we head towards the fall and winter time. Now, one thing that's very interesting of note, and something I've been studying a lot here in the last couple of days, is that the North Atlantic has been so warm, it's actually created somewhat of a stability in the atmosphere that's basically killing our chances for development in here. When it's this much hotter than it is down in here with respect to average, that can sometimes not be a good sign for development. Now, over the last 7 days, since the middle of the last week, we've seen significant cooling with respect to average in the North Atlantic here. This may actually help to ventilate the tropics and produce more action as we get to the second half of the month of September. You can see some warming here, especially off the mid-Atlantic coast, but even over the tropical Atlantic, and some warming here as well closer to Central America. So a trend I'll just be watching for you guys here. This is just 7 days of data. We need to see a longer-term trend before saying anything with any kind of certainty. But because we're seeing cooling in the northern Atlantic, it typically cools off this time of the year, but it's cooling faster than average based on these blues that we're seeing. that will actually be a sign of what could mean more storms for the second half of September. So we'll take a look at that here in the next couple of weeks. Here you can see La Nina in effect now, at least a La Nina watch. We need to see this staying below minus 0.5 for several more days and weeks before we can officially call it La Nina, but it's basically there at this point. Here's a look at the Atlantic Ocean. Area number 1 to watch is down here south of Hispaniola. Area number 2 beginning to show some signs of life. And area number 3 here south of the Cabo Verdes. There'll be more coming across Africa as well here in the coming days. We also have a bit of a feature here over the Western Gulf that's centered just over land, just north of Corpus Christi. And we do have a frontal boundary that is going to linger over the warm Gulf Stream water, so we'll have to keep an eye on things here off the east coast of Florida and the Carolinas over the coming days. The Pacific is pretty quiet, really not a lot of convection to be concerned with at this point as everything continues to move away from Mexico. Here's a look at the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see strong wind shear moving through from east to west across the northern Gulf. We also see significant amounts of rain over coastal Texas. This area here is going to eventually get translated north and east and bring heavy rain to Louisiana and the rest of the Gulf region in the coming days. We're not going to see development from it, but we are going to see locally heavy rainfall, and that's something to sort of be concerned with. Florida will continue to have scattered showers and storms, but some drier areas starting to work in from the north, at least temporarily, so we will take it while we can. Here's a look at rain totals over the next 7 days, and you'll see they're coming up in places like Corpus Christi to 5 inches, 2 to 3 around Galveston, 5 inches in Houma Thibodeau, and up to 6 inches of rain over the next week around New Orleans, greater amounts to your south and east. This could be pretty significant for those of you in Louisiana. We'll also see heavy rain advancing north and eastward here. And you can see that these totals start to climb across Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of the Florida Panhandle as well. In general, 3 to 6 inches here. We could see locally higher amounts, as you might imagine. And there is going to be some excessive rain to be dealing with here during the day today as this front begins to settle across the I-10 corridor. We'll see the risk increasing tomorrow across much of Louisiana, southern Mississippi, Alabama, and Floribama here. And as we continue that into Thursday, you can see all the way up to Meridian, Mississippi, and as far east as Fort Walton and close to Panama City and Eglin Air Force Base, we are going to see that risk for excessive rainfall. Here's a look at the rest of the Western Atlantic, and here's the wave that we're tracking here. Southwesterly flow here is keeping things at bay. Most of our thunderstorm activity on the northern side of this wave, just very disorganized. It is bringing heavy rain to Dominican Republic. That will move away towards Haiti tonight and towards Jamaica starting tomorrow. We'll see that moisture increasing across the northern Caribbean for the end of the week. But again, things are just not organizing very quickly for the time being. You can see Santo Domingo's getting rocked with heavy rainfall, heavy rain and flooding over central parts of DR here. Most of our rain and lightning is occurring here across the open waters of the Central Caribbean, but there's no closed circulation, and I don't think we're going to be seeing one of those at least for the next day or so. Farther north, the Western Atlantic, we don't see any kind of development for the time being, but we do have a lot of heavy rain and gusty winds between Georgia here and Bermuda over here. And eventually you'll get wet in Bermuda as this eventually shifts eastward. A bit of a weakness here, you kind of see a little bit of a spin east of Bermuda, but really not a lot of convection with it here, just a few trade showers affecting parts of the Western Atlantic. Over the Central Atlantic, here's where things are starting to look a little bit more impressive with this wave. It actually was a yellow area a couple days ago. It was wiped off the map over the holiday weekend, made a return here, a bit of a comeback if you want to call it that, over just the last 24 hours. And this actually has a chance of becoming our next depression, believe it or not. I know it's just a yellow area now, but I'm not seeing much from this wave in the Central Caribbean. And the other system's so far out, it's got some time before it can form. But the good news here is that generally speaking, it's going to move into some cooler water and should probably avoid these islands in here. I say should. Crazier things have happened. So this one may actually get to be Francine, depending on what happens with our next feature, which is moving just south of the Cabo Verdes, generally in this direction. This one's gaining more latitude than this one, which is not. There's also another wave moving through Mali here and towards Mauritania. That could also become something Western Africa here, but again, we've got a few more days before we need to track that. So if we look at the ensembles and the probability of something forming, our chances are pretty limited for the time being. I'm not really focused so much on the Gulf for this low that's near land. I know some of the ensembles try to bring it back over water in a couple of days, and that's something we need to watch. But right now, I don't think something forms. The area south of Jamaica's got about a 30% chance, and the area of the Central Atlantic's got about a 50% chance, and then the one behind it also 30%. But you can see as we move this on into time between now and Friday night, the area most likely to become a depression is the one that'll be in the Gulf of Honduras, east of Belize. The area next most likely is this wave we're tracking as it moves close to the islands. And then we're going to keep an eye on something here in the Western Gulf that I'm not quite as convinced about. The system near the Cabo Verdes is unlikely to be a threat over time. As we move into next week, chances of something in the Western Gulf are now increasing on our ensembles. So we were ready to kill this sucker because it was going to go into southwest Mexico or the Bay of Campeche and then continue on into Mexico. But what you will notice here around this time next week is that it may still be over water. It may start to drift northward and begin to take on a form of something that could try to develop a little bit more. So a 90% chance of this being a depression in the southwestern Gulf by the first half of next week. The wave behind it's got a 70 to 80% chance of becoming a depression, but you can see those chances start to come down as it turns closer to Bermuda. The next wave actually has a less chance of the one behind it. Even though it's being shown as a 40%, the European ensemble does not agree with that forecast, and in fact develops a system behind it and kind of kills the one ahead of it. So all in all, tracking system number one, which may reform here in the Southwest Gulf next week. System number two has a chance of developing and then may weaken when it gets up into here. System number three is going to get overwhelmed by system number four, which is just getting ready to come off of Africa now. And oh, by the way, we've got a front here where just a couple of ensembles try to hint at something weak trying to form. But the one I'm most concerned with, obviously, is the one closest to land because it will be into an area that development looks like it'll be more favorable. Now, here's why I'm concerned. If you look at this upper level chart, you can see where the vorticity is here by Thursday morning. Nothing super impressive. And as we get into Friday morning, there may be something forming heading towards Belize or the Yucatan-Belize border here, maybe clipping the coasts of Guatemala and Honduras as well with some heavy rain. This is going to be Friday around lunchtime. And then as we get to the weekend, this system remains over Central America and probably weakens. Here's why I'm not concerned about Florida. We've got this big area of high pressure east of Bermuda, trough swinging through the eastern U.S., bringing that cooler weather in, and a ridge off the map here across the southwestern United States. Now, as we move this on into time, you will see the ridge east of Florida and the Bermuda region actually build back to the west. This is going to force anything to continue more into the Western Gulf. See, here's where the high pressure is centered, but the ridge actually extends across South Florida, even into the Gulf of Mexico. This trough leaves the area, and this high is stuck here. And what's happened is, in between everything, we've got a kind of a very weak area of steering. And what happens is, when we get this area of low pressure sitting here, it's kind of stuck. It can't escape to the north and east because this ridge is building to the west. It can't continue west because this trough is coming down, trying to bring it into some more of a southerly flow aloft, bringing it more northward. And there's also a feature down in here, which is building in this direction. So it's really stuck between all of these players on the field with nothing and really no certain place to go. So we have to watch it because it may continue to just hover here up until about next Wednesday or Thursday. And then you can see the next trough that digs down may try to pick it up if it's still alive, that is. It may try to get scooped up by this trough here. And then we have to watch it in Texas and Louisiana. So we got over a week before we get too stressed about it at this point, but I like to watch the trends and see what's going on. Here's a look at our European ensemble spaghetti guidance here. Weak feature in the Western Gulf tries to come back here on some of the ensembles. Better chance that this feature moves into Belize here as we get to Friday afternoon, and then across the Yucatan and Central America over the weekend, and then making its way back into the Western Gulf. This is a mess, but there's actually two features here. This is what could be Francine, or maybe Gordon if that one becomes Francine first. And then we've got this weak system up here, which is trying to get back over the Gulf of Mexico and develop. It's not going to develop quickly. Now, these two could merge. This one could be stronger and kill this one, or this one could actually take over, or that one could take over. And there's just way too many scenarios at this point to give you a clear forecast. And I just want to be honest with you guys here. There's nothing very clear about this right now. There's just a trend that I have to watch for you. As we move into the middle of next week, we do see a lot more guidance that is trying to bring this northward in response to that next trough that comes down. And so as a result, we have a cluster of storms that try to develop into a stronger tropical storm, possibly even a hurricane, and even some really strong solutions that the GFS hinted at a couple of days ago and still from time to time is showing. But then we very well could also have just a weak feature that dies as it moves into Mexico. So really too soon to make any kind of call on this, just something that we'll be watching for you guys. I'll show you operational models, but they are struggling mightily here. You can see just low pressures forming on fronts here, waves coming across Africa, just a big mess of all of our models, operational models. Again, I don't want to get too carried away with any one particular model, but you can see the European does have something here in the southwestern Gulf by this time next week. Here's a closer view of that earlier European from today. We'll have a new one this afternoon. And you can see not much forms. Sorry for the slowness here, but not much is going to form over the next coming days. Let me hit the refresh button and see if that gets me anywhere. Maybe, maybe not. That's all right. It doesn't show much development here. The Canadian shows something very weak, moving into Belize, maybe a depression Friday morning, and then making its way into the southwestern Gulf here over the weekend. But the Canadian model says it is far enough away from the Mexican coast here to have a chance of developing. It also means this front that's dropping into the Gulf is going to try to pick up the wind on the western side and bring us a strong northerly flow, and that could induce a stronger circulation in here. So again, it's just one model, but it is certainly something to watch. And as we move this along further into time, I don't know why it's not loading. There we go. We'll get there. We may just have to move on. All right, so I had an internet outage and my program restarted. I do not have time to recut this, but I wanted to show you guys the icon model, which was taking our system, moving across Belize into this area, and then taking this weakness here over Texas, bringing them down into here and merging them next Monday, and then developing our system and moving it northward. And you can see this is next Wednesday, the 11th. On this track, it would be a threat to Texas later next week. Not a threat to Florida, probably not a threat to Alabama or Western Florida. When I said first Florida, I meant the peninsula, Southwest Florida. But the western half of the Gulf of Mexico. This is the icon model. And again, the Canadian was showing this as well. Finally, the GFS, which I don't have the 12Z all the way in yet. This is one that was starting to hint at something like that happening. It has backed off. The latest GFS is trickling in, but I don't think I'm going to have anything I can show you. Maybe I will. But you can see here, weak system, doesn't really even develop, moves across Central America, then into the southwestern Gulf, and the GFS has some feedback issues and instead tries to develop this in the Gulf of Tehuantepec on the Pacific side of Mexico, not on the Gulf side. So again, two models showing something here. We got to watch it, but a lot of models not showing anything and a lot of uncertainty as we have a system that may get stuck here through the middle of next week. Finally, in the Western Pacific, this is Tropical Storm Yagi moving away from the northern Philippines, generally heading towards southern China and maybe the Gulf of Tonkin and northeastern Vietnam. This will strengthen, and something that we definitely need to be watching for those watching here in Asia. You can see zoomed in here, starting to show some signs of intensification here this afternoon. Of course, overnight in West Asia or East Asia. And as we look at our tropical models, we'll see that the system is going to start to take off here tomorrow and become a stronger typhoon by Thursday night and Friday. This model's probably too strong with it, but it will be a significant storm moving across southern China and northeastern Vietnam by Friday and over the weekend. Here are our models that show the potential track of this system. Some differences, but you can see, generally speaking, a westerly track. And here is the official forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. It'll be a tropical storm that becomes a typhoon late tonight, and then a strong typhoon by tomorrow night and Thursday morning, and a very strong typhoon then tracking towards Vietnam after that. So I apologize for today's glitch, out of my hands, and I just don't have the time to do it again, but please know that I will continue to do my best to get you guys videos here every day. I always thank you for your time. I appreciate if you guys could become a member of this community if you haven't already. If you did enjoy this video, please consider sharing with your friends as well, and just getting the word out, especially those of you in Texas and across the Caribbean and across Mexico and Central America. As always, not only do I thank you, but I want to give all the credit, all the honor and glory to my God, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He has given me this day. And I think no matter what goes on and what you personally believe, and it may not be what I believe, We have to be thankful because not every day is a guarantee. We're all going through challenges in our life. We would love to be able to have control of these, but we just can't. I feel like we are created on earth to try to figure things out, but we were also created to have somebody to follow, and that somebody is our Lord and our Savior. Psalm 118:24 says, "This is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." I actually have it on my wristband here to remind me of no matter how much my day might be sucking, it's still another day and it's a gift from God. So I need to express my appreciation, go to the Lord in thankfulness, and to be more obedient. And I pray that that's the situation you're in. But if it's not, I'm not going to judge you. That is not my role. My role is to welcome you and encourage you. But you are welcome to believe whatever you like. I just truly believe that I've been called to share the good news with you, that the Lord is here and that he will be with us forever. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining me today. See you soon.